Hey guys, thanks for joining me. Public service announcement. If you don't have a pair of computer glasses that actually block blue light and things like that, highly recommend them. I had LASIK. Gosh, I can't remember how long it was, probably 3, 4 years ago. One of the best purchases I ever made. But with all the time that I spend, and I'm sure lots of other people spend with screen time, I've noticed lately that my eyes have started to bother me again just because I am in front of a screen a lot, focusing really hard on what I'm doing and not looking around, taking in some distances every now and then. So highly recommend some screen glasses for anytime you're in front of the screen. Public service announcement number 2. If you have not watched The Last Kingdom on Netflix, Destiny is all. That's what the shirt says. Highly recommend you go check it out. They just wrapped up the last season. There will be a movie coming out, but it is my favorite series literally of all time. I love it when you watch series and you don't recognize the cast from in the beginning. And then, they just show to be such amazing actor and actresses. So highly recommend that as well. Today, we're going to talk about and follow up on something that I posted for you last week, which was last week I was talking about this idea of, should you start a brand new business or should you buy an existing business? And I talked about how to sort of work through that thought process. Today, I want to talk to you about the idea of the things you should consider if you decide that buying a business is the right path for you. So I'm going to run you through 5 different things that you should consider. Keep in mind, this is not an exhaustive video. You know me by now. My videos tend to be somewhere between 5, maybe 15 minutes max. If I were to cover everything you should consider when buying a business and in detail, it would be just too long that I don't think anyone would want to sit through it. So I'm going to give you 5 things that come to mind for me when it comes to buying a business, and I hope those help you. So the very first thing to think about is to think about what type of owner you're going to be. Now, I'm not talking about the culture you're going to build or anything like that. I'm actually asking if you're going to be running the business yourself or if you're going to be what I would call an absentee owner. Now, of course, an absentee owner can be completely absentee and have very little to do with the business, or you might be partially absentee. But the thing to decide for you is if you go ahead and you buy a business, do you want to be heavily involved in the operations, or would you rather be a bit more of an absentee business owner? And I think the latter of the two is really what's being promoted out there. A lot of the Instagram gurus are talking about buying businesses and basically having, cash flow machines where they're not very involved. Certainly some of those exist. The challenge with this decision is if you are heavily involved in the day in and day out operations, then what you've really done is not bought a business, but you've bought yourself a job. And that's really important for you to think about. Probably why I kind of accented it so much when I said it. If you're buying a business and you're going to be an absentee owner, you have other things you have to be worried about, right? So can you trust the person that you hire to run the business? Can you trust them to execute on the plan and grow the business? Can you trust them to not steal from you? There are so many stories of absentee owners not paying attention to what's going on in their business. And then they find out that the person who is running it for them is robbing them blind, right? And then on top of that, if you are an absentee owner and they end up being a good person running your business, can you retain them in the first place? And there's lots of strategies for that. But imagine that you've bought this business, you've got it running well, you've brought in a manager to run it for you. They're doing an excellent job. But then in today's market, it's hard to keep talent. Can you retain them? If they leave you, then you're going to try and replace them. That'll slow you down. So there's all kinds of challenges that come with it. But you've got to decide if you're going to be actively involved in the business or more of an absentee owner. And that will help you think about the type of business you should buy in the first place. The second thing I want to talk to you about is, do you have the appropriate skills to oversee the running of the business in the first place? Now, I used to be in the banking industry. If you followed me for a while, you know that, and used to do a ton of loans for professionals that were making really comfortable livings, and they either wanted to sort of take that income and turn it into other income streams, and then some of them just didn't like what they were doing in the first place, and they were trying to start up businesses that could replace their existing income. And a great example of this I used to see all the time was you would find doctors who would come and they would want to start a restaurant because they loved food or something like that. Now, MDs, doctors, are really smart people, but what they're really smart about and what their experience is about is the human body. That just because they're a really great professional in terms of a doctor and maybe really intelligent doesn't mean they're going to be great at running a restaurant or any other number of businesses. So do you have the appropriate skills to run the type of business you're thinking about buying in the first place? Let's go back to number one for a minute. If you're an absentee business owner and your manager leaves, you're probably going to have to step in there for a while. And if you don't have the right skill set, that's going to be a real big challenge for you. So that's the second thing I want you to think about. Number three is going to be, how will you finance the purchase of an existing business? Now, I'd help companies raise capital in all kinds of ways, whether it's startup funding through investors or loans to buy a business or grow an existing business. And with an existing business, typically the best path, unless it's a really high growth potential, investors don't really work good. What's typically the best path for buying an existing business of some sort is going to be a business loan. And honestly, the best business loans that you can usually get to do this is an SBA loan, Small Business Administration loan. So thinking about how you're going to finance the purchase of this business is really important. There are all kinds of other ways you can do it. You can actually take out loans against your own 401k balance. I've seen people do that to buy a business, these types of things. But generally speaking, when you're financing the purchase of an existing business, usually some sort of business loan, an SBA loan makes perfect sense. If you have questions about how those work, feel free to reach out to me and I'll answer those questions for you as well, or point you in the right direction. The fourth thing to think about is, does the business have a good foundation? Now, when you're buying a business, you should do all kinds of due diligence on it and see how it's performing. Does it have bad reviews? Does it have good profit margins? Those types of things. But what I will say is, when you're buying an existing business, you don't want one that is performing at its very peak. Okay, so I want to say that again. When you buy an existing business, you don't want to buy it when it's performing at its very peak. What you really want to do is find a business that has a ton of growth potential, but maybe the existing owner just doesn't have the skill set or energy even to get it to that point. So buying a business that is maybe even struggling a little bit, if you do have the skill set to really push it and improve upon it to grow it, then that's a really great thing to do. But when you buy that business, you want it to at least have a really good foundation. You want to have a good foundation that you're building upon. Otherwise, thinking about proverbial house that you're building in a foundation, if you don't have a good foundation, the walls aren't going to stay up. So you want a good foundation, but room for improvement so that you can sort of move it up and pay yourself back more. And then the fifth thing to think about is, why is the seller moving on in the first place? In my years doing this, I've seen all kinds of reasons that sellers move on. Maybe they want to retire finally. Maybe they have another business and they want to focus there. I've seen instances where the seller, the owner, was maybe sick. Maybe they had cancer, or someone they needed to care for had a disease that took a lot of their attention away from the business. One of the reasons that does not make sense is if you start to dig in and they tell you an excuse of a reason, but you start to dig in and realize that the business just isn't doing well. They're not even really able to pay themselves an income. When you see an instance like that, that should cause you some alarm. Now, does that mean it's not a good business to buy? Not necessarily, because if you can come in, back to number 4, and improve things, if it's got a good foundation and you can improve things and then grow that business, then you can buy it at a deep discount, because the seller probably just wants to move on because they're losing money like crazy anyways. But there still should be some sort of red flag that goes off in your head when you see a seller that is moving on and they cannot give you a really good reason for why they are wanting to do that. So 5 different things for you to think about when you decide to buy a business. If you are deciding to buy a business and you're curious about the various ways in which you can fund the purchase of that business, I have a couple of courses that you should consider. I'll put a link to them in the notes for the video. They walk you through exactly how business loans work, including SBA loans, so that when you go to a lender, you can speak the language, you know exactly what they're looking for, and have a much better chance of getting that business approved for a loan in the first place. If you happen to decide that, you know what, buying a business isn't right for me, then I have another course that's great for you. One will walk you through exactly the entire launch process I use when starting a business. And then the other that I'll link to is how startup funding works when you're trying to attract investors. I'll walk you through the exact process of preparing to meet with investors, what they look for, how to meet investors, and all these other things. So lots of resources for you, whether you decide you're going to buy a business or start one from scratch. All right. Until next time, I hope that helps. Hope you have a great day. Take care.